Greetings and welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of UC Weekly News. Although I guess I should say for this week, it's going to be the AI Weekly News because we're going to be covering a really interesting AI story. And I have a couple of guests with me. Dave Michels, my partner, is on. How you doing, Dave?
It's great to be here. This is going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, and Sorell, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody who you are and what you do for people that might not be familiar with you.
Hi, everybody. Sorell Slaymaker. I'm based out of Minnesota. I was a former Gartner analyst, and now I'm working for TechVision Research, which is a bunch of ex-Gartner analysts that have to come together to focus on identity and access management, AI, and I run the networking and telecom practice.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, Dave. You sent out some information the other day that basically said that one of the Terminator movies is actually happening. We now have this cute lady that can break into any system all the time. Her name is Mythos, right? Why don't you give us the background on
Well,
that?
no, the Terminator movie is actually that happened last year. I mean, the being able to impersonate and change voices and all that stuff, that's all old news. So
Skynet is
this is
live.
the
Okay, got
Sneakers
that.
movie. This is the movie. You remember the movie Sneakers?
Yes.
One of Robert Redford's better movies.
Mhm.
I'd say the top one among the top five. But in that movie, they come across a new technology that can basically crack every form of encryption. And there's a great line in the movie. He says, "There's not a government on this planet that wouldn't kill every one of us in this room for that technology." And that technology potentially has arrived. It's called Mythos. It came from Anthropic, and and today we're going to talk about the Mythos inflection. And I thought Sorell would be a great guest because he's perceived as a security expert, and so we'll put that to the test here. Um, how do we get started?
So let's give a quick background to anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about if we don't have them off there. We understand Anthropic is one of the AI engines that's out there. They've announced that they've got this Mythos piece that they won't release to the general public, but they'll release it to people who pay them enough money because it's important. ChatGPT, OpenAI said, "Well, we've got one too." Kind of like the Holy Grail movie saying, "Oh, we've got a Grail too." Um, am I getting this right? Am I getting this wrong? We understand it's all powerful, can work at superhuman speeds, can crack multiple systems at the same time, expose all vulnerabilities faster than any cybersecurity defender could possibly defend against it. And nobody has seen it except these people that are paying a lot of money to get into the system. Did I get that right from a basic standpoint?
That's pretty close. I'm sure we'll get Sorrell here to chime in a little bit on this, but I think basically, the last 3 years we've kind of grown numb to this AI race and better models who could do this better, could complete sentences better, could read your thoughts better, etc. This is kind of a whole new. That's why we're calling it an inflection, the Mythos inflection. This is a whole new category of AI. So, Sorrell, why don't you help us define what Mythos is as far as we know, because no one's actually seen it. But
Right. Well, it's hard to say if this is a huge leap change or just the next evolution. You listen to a lot of the quote experts out there, and they'll say it's a big leap. I'm more of it's just the next step in this AI arms race. And it's really going to become an arms race where we see not only private companies getting involved, but also, public governments. And for example, China is really trying to keep up, if not beat the U.S. in this AI arms race. And one of the big words I'm going to use today is quantum. Is this a quantum leap? And the reason I bring up the word quantum is because, 5, 10 years ago, quantum computing was going to be able to do what they could do on SneakerNet, as Dave said, is going to allow the decryption of 256 AES, which is the common standard that everything is encrypted on and over on the internet.
so the difference, though, is quantum was a fear that this might happen, and apparently was a early fear because it hasn't happened for a while. So that's kind of old news, old fear. But this one's different because this is supposedly here. Supposedly, Anthropic says that they have set this thing free, and they have found that it immediately cracked and hacked lots of systems that we thought were secure. And this is really interesting. The last month, Anthropic was accused of being a supply chain risk and barred from the government because we can't trust them. This month, Anthropic says, hey, we have this technology that is completely going to turn the world upside down. And because we're so responsible, we are going to not release it to the general public and have a controlled environment. So maybe it's just a big PR thing, right?
If anybody claiming that we have something but it's too dangerous to release, I'm always going to go back to wag the dog. You know, it's kind of, you have to prove that. And I know that they've got companies that are on board with a consortium, but again, as much as it's scary, it's also very susceptible to being, as you point out, just the next PR balloon.
But to their credit, you know, they said, hey, this thing has released 0-day vulnerabilities in money software applications that we have deployed throughout the internet that had gone undetected. So it's pretty hard to fake that, right? Thousands of critical flaws in various OSs, and you know, Sorell made the comment about what do you call it? AES 256. What's the formal name, Sorell?
AES encryption. Yep.
Yep. And so that is the best encryption that we know, but the best encryption is not used on everything. There's a lot of things that have much lower encryption. A lot of things.
Right. Well, it's the standard encryption. And yeah, if you get a little more details, you know, for example, this software went through BSD, Linux, which is a very common secure operating system that a lot of Amazon and others use as their foundational OS. And it found a couple of vulnerabilities, you know, right out of the bat. And this is, you know, an OS that's been around for decades, that's been scrutinized at universities and by governments. And the fact that it could do so very quickly shows you its potential power. Now, like with all things, you know, you can use this power for good or you can use this power for evil.
Oh,
And
evil's way to go, man. Definitely.
Yep. And so the concern here is, you know, it could be used by malicious folks and governments in ways that could potentially put a lot of organizations at risk. And you know, the hard part, you know, in this is, you know, I always like to say that people are both the weak point of security and also the ability to help solve new problems in new ways. You know, one of Einstein's, you know, quotes is, "You can't solve, you know, today's problems with today's technology." So a lot of these problems that are going to come up, we're going to need new technology such as AI to help us solve. But again, that has to be managed. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, this arms race. I mean, it's just like back in the 50s, you know, when we were doing, you know, nuclear weapons and all the, you know, things that could go wrong in the world if they were someone launched or they got in the wrong hands or something like that. This is the potential in the digital world of the same thing. And this digital world that we're all living in and that is driving a lot of organizations is at risk. And so in order to, you know, stay ahead, because that's what an arms race is we got to stay ahead of the capabilities of those that are out there to do malicious. And it's hard. And it's been hard for 20 years because internal organizations have bureaucracies, they have budgets, they have a whole bunch of things that slow them down that hackers and nation states don't have to overcome. And so that's where there's an actual shift. And
This
part
is
of
this
this,
is the hard part. I think you're wrong about the hard. The hard part's going to be for people like you who are going to have to come up with a whole new set of material because I mean I saw you at Enterprise Connect. I saw your security presentation, Enterprise Connect, and you talked about the usual stuff. You talked about you can only assume it's secure if you control it, and be careful where you upload it to, and all that stuff. And so now the new phobia is around AI. But you did the same damn presentation 10 years ago about uploading it to the cloud services. I mean, you've been milking the same material for years, decades, and now you're going to have to get a whole new material because this isn't really necessarily about just enterprise best practices. It's really much more about the vulnerabilities of society as a whole. I mean, the idea that almost everything that we rely on from on the net is vulnerable. That's a whole different conversation, really. I mean, That's the inflection, right?
Yep. And really what this means is the speed of change, the speed of what you need to stay ahead of this whole arms race, that's only going to accelerate. And in fact, a lot of your big organizations are now running their infrastructure teams 24/7. So instead of your networking engineers and your compute engineers and your people, the test dev teams coming in just working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, no, they got to work, and then you have to have teams around the clock, 7 days a week, because the rate of change is becoming so fast, and it's only going to get faster that you have to do that to keep up. And that's a big culture change. And
Yeah.
Dave, you're over there in Europe, and Europe is not known for changing at a high rate of speed. And this is going to drive, this whole AI arms race is going to drive the speed of change up.
So whatever we're
Yeah,
talking about,
it's
we're always going to be talking about the haves and the have-nots. So the haves in this case are Project Glasswing. Is that the term that I've heard about that? Can one
yep,
of you guys
yep.
explain what that is?
So because they didn't release it, they decided the most important thing to do was to create a group of people, companies that could have access to it on a controlled basis. This is kind of fascinating. So the usual suspects, the big computer companies that are responsible for most of these hacks, are now assessing how vulnerable they were and what kind of service packs they need to get out. What's interesting is, so they call this the Glasswing group. And it's expensive because it's a lot of processing power that is going toward preparing for the release of software like this, not necessarily revenue. I was kind of surprised because they put companies like JP Morgan and Chase on the list. And to me, that seems strange, right? I mean, I know that these are vulnerable big banks and, we have to protect our banks, but it really should be the technology companies that supply these companies. I mean, maybe JP Morgan is more technical than I'm giving them credit for, but the usual suspects were on the list of Project Glasswing. Um, but I was just surprised by some of the more of the customers that were on the list.
Right. Well, I mean, speaking of big banks, I did a consulting gig for a big bank last year, and they were looking at supporting Bitcoin. And when you're supporting Bitcoin, how you secure that is even tougher and more risk than regular currency because if someone actually takes your Bitcoin, it's harder to claw that back than if they actually take, dollars. And so the level of security that we had to provide for the support of these digital currencies is an example of why, these big organizations with trillions of dollars in assets are having to be leaders in technology because they too are vulnerable. And they have to be part of this ecosystem that's involved in this arms race.
When
Sorrel,
you learned about Mythos, Sorel, did you make any changes? Did you move cash to Bitcoin? Did you change your passwords? Did you do anything that you felt needed immediate action?
I did not. But I'm a small player in a great big world, so I'm a small
Just a
target.
pawn in the game of life?
Yeah, yeah, there you go. So, but the in the security space, part of it is managing risk, managing your paranoia. And the first thing that came to mind is there's going to be greater risk, and we're going to become more paranoid. And with greater risk and being more paranoid, organizations are going to start saying, do I want all my critical data to be at a third-party system, or do I want to bring back some of that data and compute within an ecosystem that is, quote, closed, that I can control, and all the people that have access to it and the logs and all the subsequent, auxiliary data that can be well maintained and controlled. I've seen, big companies like I don't want to name them, where they leak a lot of information in their billing systems, and so their billing systems don't have the same level of security as their core data. But in billing, we've got who's talking to who, who's transferring money to whatever, all this type of stuff that metadata that goes into the billing system is useful information to some organizations or nation states.
10, 15 years ago, I was a big believer in backing up my PC. There were lots of software applications that you could use to run a backup and make sure that you were secure in case you were ever hit with a hack or a virus or something else like that, or you dropped your PC off a building. And I learned very early on that most of them don't work because while the backup's functional, the restore never actually happens. Just is not
So the
functional.
backup is easy. It's the restore that doesn't work.
Correct. So my security posture became that you can't ever put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And what you need to do is make sure that you've got your data in a secure off the cloud space so that if you ever have to recover from any kind of failure, you go to an automated backup system or a manual backup system that wasn't affected by the latest changes. And it looks like that's going to start to become best practice. If everything that's out there on the net from all these big companies can be hacked instantly by Mythos or things like it, then the solution isn't ever going to be to put it back together. The solution is going to be to protect things from that intrusion point. And I guess that's where, cybersecurity is going to need to change.
Well, I think you're hitting on an important point there, is that anything can be hacked. That's a fundamental. Where the more sophisticated security systems are, both on the identity side and the compute side, with zero knowledge trust underneath it, is distributed security, and it's sort of what makes blockchain, so secure, even though it's very public, is because that ledger is distributed, and so one system can be hacked, but just because one system hacked doesn't mean everything is now available. And I think this distributed world is going to be required, both from an identity perspective and from a data perspective, so that not all your information is in one place. Organizations are terrible about this. They have these active directory structures. This is all the people who work in my company and all this type of stuff. And it's a single directory that resides in a single system that is then copied to other systems. And that just doesn't cut it. You need to have this distributed so that your data doesn't ever sit in one quote honeypot, that it is actually distributed out there and you're not subject to just one system that can be hacked.
You know, back to what David had said earlier when we opened. He talked about Terminator movies and Terminator 2, the better of the Terminator movies, with the modern improved Terminator. It could impersonate all these voices very effectively, and it was able to get through a lot of things. And then Sorell, you mentioned the scale really increasing and the pace of change is really accelerating. It's also the pace or the scale of the size of attacks you could have now, because with old AI you could place 1,000 calls at once into an enterprise and try to do social engineering hacks and then using different voices and whatnot to try to get some information. You combine that with Mythos and going after very specific vulnerabilities. We're looking at a good reason to be paranoid. It seems like it seems like you build security systems for as good as the current technology. And so we've been building security systems on the net for 30 years. And I mean, when was the last time you reset your Amazon password? And it's like, well, Amazon, what can you do with Amazon? Well, it's got access to credit card information, it's got access to all your addresses. You could use that information for social engineering. You can do all kinds of things. But I'm betting my password on Amazon was set somewhere around 1998. And maybe I should probably change that or something. But it's the times are changing way faster than I think people realize. I mean, this is yeah. So I think Mythos is harmless right now because Anthropic is supposedly being responsible with it. OpenAI, they'll sell it to the highest bidder. And if a foreign nation gets it here, I don't know what's going to happen here. You got thoughts on this one?
Well, this is what makes it scary, is because now my AI engine has to be better than your AI engine. Is ultimately what it's going to come down to, because the speed at which AI can do things and move, I can't have a human in the middle. So when I get hacked and they start pulling information, I'm going to have a system that can shut that down and isolate it and fix it in near real time. And getting a human involved just takes way too much time to be able to quarantine, isolate,
Yeah.
and then fix or solve a given problem. And so this is why I come back to this arms race. Ultimately, as an enterprise and as an AI organization, mine has to be better than yours, and that's
Well,
going to be hard.
and there won't be any warning. That's
Right.
the thing that scares me. I mean, you like to think, well, I'll just kind of I'll pay attention to the news every day. If one bank gets hacked, maybe I'll do something and take my money out of my other bank or whatever. But things happen so quickly. And I think about when Silicon Valley Bank had financial problems. That was like there was no warning. It just happened. I asked you if you moved any of your funds around or your investments around. The government guarantees banks, I think it's $250,000. But a lot of these startups had millions and millions of dollars in their account that, of course, have no kind of federal assurance, FDIC assurance. I don't know about. I'm rethinking. I've got a couple billion parked in a no interest checking account. I'm rethinking that strategy. I'll tell you that right now. But I'm gonna have to open up a lot of accounts with the 250 protection. So
Yeah, I think
um,
we have to all assume that everything that we've got is vulnerable, and recovery on each one of them when they get hacked is going to be difficult, if not impossible. So the answer is to never keep everything in one place. It's this distributed architecture that Sorell is talking about, that we have to treat each one of these individual systems as disposable and be able to shift rapidly to environments that have, trusted data in other places.
I want to go back to a topic we kind of brushed over. Anthropic decided to hold this, and my reaction was great, good for them, good company. It seems like uh, should that be their decision? If Anthropic had decided to release it public, should that have been their decision? We don't really have any AI oversight at this point. And so we're not going to fix this tomorrow, but who should have the decision control if a new AI model is coming out? Should that just be up to the vendor, do you think? What do you think on that one?
Well, governance in any, area is always tricky, whether it's standards bodies, whether it's national governments, whether it's global organizations like UN and stuff like that. For them to be able to create, standards, draw lines in the sand, stuff like that is going to take years. And these organizations are not designed to be able to create and institute policies at the rate of change of AI. I mean, AI for a while, I took a list back in the mid 80s. And so AI has been around for a while, but it's only in the last 5 years where it's gone from something like this to something like this. And the scary part is the rate of change. How much better AI is this year than it was just a year ago
Yeah.
is growing so rapidly that I'm using it to create PowerPoints and stuff like that. It's doing a pretty good job. Last year, I didn't even use it for it because it was terrible. This year, it's doing pretty good. I think by next year, it's going to be damn good. And this is why the Gartners of the world are suffering because eventually AI is going to be almost as good, if not better, than your standard analyst. And
I will
so
be able to make extremely boring presentations much faster with this technology. Yeah.
exactly. Yep. And so this rate of change is just is going to really go. And I think going back to this arms race analogy is very applicable. And I think it's also going to be it is a arms race. So who controls the world in 5, 10, 20 years from now is not only going to be the biggest armies, because we're learning this about Ukraine and Russia. It's going to be those countries that can adopt and adapt the newer technology is the quickest and approaches and stuff like that. And so that speed of change, adoption, and stuff like
Yeah.
that is really going to come down to those organizations that can embrace and thrive in this new world versus those who are just trying to hang on and survive.
In the last few minutes that we have here, the question that all our viewers will always be asking is, now that I know this, what do I do? Is there any action item to come out of this information?
Well, if assuming the world is still functioning and everything hasn't crashed yet, you should definitely stay tuned to Talking Points because we'll be covering it pretty closely. But along those lines, Sorell, bringing it back to a comms perspective, do you feel the comms industry is particularly vulnerable to something like Mythos?
I think it is. I mean, even back in my early government days, the rule number one is the only way to truly protect data is don't create data in the first place. So we're in the process of, using AI to record all these calls, to transcribe all these calls. And once that data is created, it's really hard to keep it, from getting into the wrong hands. From a logging perspective, from a billing perspective, from a misuse perspective. What people like to do with data? They like to bulk copy data and put it on another system and then run a different AI learning algorithm on it. And so, I think not only the comms industry, but all industries have to look at what data do we truly need. I mean, 5 years ago, I was pushing Microsoft as an example really hard on doing end-to-end encryption. That they shouldn't in any way be able to see your communications and who you're communicating with and all that type of stuff. Well, that whole model broke when AI became in the middle because I had to bridge and a listener had to understand the conversation. And
Yeah.
and so now with AI, I'm not doing end-to-end encryption, which was a must-have 5 years ago. So that's an example of how AI is actually hurting us in the comms world.
Yeah, so if we just stop communicating, we would be more secure.
Or when we communicate, we are careful of what we say.
Okay. Well,
Now,
that'll
what
be
Yeah,
was
so
your
it's,
Amazon password that you created back in 1998?
I don't think anybody
Bosco. It was
even
Bosco.
I don't think anybody even pays attention to passwords anymore. I log into all the systems that I log into, and the first thing that they do is send me a text message. If I didn't have my phone to answer the text message, the password would be useless. I don't
But
even know
but you
why I
can't do
bother
that.
anymore.
Well, depending on the flight, but you can't do that if you're on a plane. I get a lot of work done on airplanes, and they all want to send me a text message and say, I can't log in."
Yeah, so we definitely have some problems that we haven't thought about going forward. But Sorrel, if somebody wants to reach out to you and get more of your expertise, how would they do that?
Very securely.
Well, I've got four cell phones and one's very secure. But no, I'm out there at Tech Vision, also on LinkedIn. So if you want to, send me a note on LinkedIn, I'll be glad to continue this discussion.
Yeah,
And
if you want to reach out to Sorrell on security matters, just write an email to some stranger about you want to talk to Sorrell. He'll call. Um,
and Dave, while this is playing out for the first time, I'm in Las Vegas for NAB, and you're on your way to Orlando, right?
Microsoft 365, and I'm going to see if I can get a hell of a good deal on a
Surface
hub.
Hub.
Yeah, Surface Hub. That's it. Surface Hub. I'm
Hearing
gonna.
that
I'm,
the Surface Hub 3 was discontinued or is going about to be discontinued, so you should be able to get a great deal on it. If you want, I have my smart cap back here somewhere. Anyway, so thank you very much for watching, everybody. Next week we will be on. Dave and I will be talking about those two events, NAB Las Vegas and Microsoft 365 in Orlando. But until then, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.